or the listing becomes a cancellation, where there's not a meeting of the mind, the seller decides, you know what, I don't want to continue moving forward, I want to cancel the listing, okay? And then ultimately, you know, the expiration of the listing, you go 4 months, 6 months, or even a year on the listing, and you market the property, but unfortunately you don't get any offers, or the property never closes. So then it becomes an expired listing. So I want to make sure that I'm very clear on, you know, the expiration, but ultimately how to protect your commission. I want to share a quick video before we get started. So let me go back here real quick, just so you get an understanding of what, you know, the commission after expiration entails. So bear with me here momentarily, and hopefully you can see my screen.
A real estate listing agreement is a legally binding contract that gives you the right to sell your client's home.
Can you see
It is
that?
possible to earn compensation for offers that are made by certain prospective buyers, even if accepted after the listing period has expired. Check your listing agreement when asking your clients to commit and sign on the dotted line. In it, you will find a section, Section 3A2. Here are 3 easy ways to protect yourself. First, a time period must be entered identifying for how long the protection period or safety clause lasts. Second, you must give the seller a list of all prospective buyers, and the list must be provided before the listing period expires. And third, every prospective buyer must have met one of 2 criteria in order to be properly included on the list. First, the prospective buyer must have physically entered and been shown the property, or second, the prospect must have submitted a signed written offer on the property. It is important to protect yourself and your business by following these easy steps for a safe and successful sale.
All right, wonderful. So these are the 3 elements that we're going to be talking about. How do you implement that on the listing agreement? What are the 2 requirements, right? And then ultimately you have to provide the seller with this exclusion list before it expires or cancels. Because if we don't meet the 3 elements, then unfortunately we cannot collect the commission after the fact. So today's topic is what we call after the fact. What if you list the property, then you're showing the property, either someone submitted an offer, you do an open house, they saw the property, and now the transaction cancels, and then you go a couple months and it never incurs another buyer, and the listing becomes an expired listing, and you never provide that exclusion list, and that buyer comes back and submits an offer with another agent, or more so, the buyer works with the seller and ultimately open escrow. And that's the provision that I'm trying to protect you in regards to the commission and how we can protect that. So we're going to go in deep into this conversation. And as we go, please, if you have any questions or don't understand any of the components, make sure to raise your hand or ask the question. So you guys ready? Say yes. All right. Let me just move this up a little bit and open it up a little bit more. All right, so commission after expiration of the listing. So offer accepted during the listing period. Every realtor who gets a signed exclusive listing agreement hopes to sell their property during the exclusive listing period and earn a real estate commission. Under the paragraph 3A1 of the listing agreement, CAR form RLA, there's 3 events that must happen before a commission is due under that paragraph. A ready, willing, and able is procured by the listing broker, meaning you list the property, right? You put it on the multiple listing, right? You host open houses, right? You get an up call from a potential buyer that is not being represented by a listing or excuse me, by an agent, and they're reaching out to you to maybe possibly represent. Okay. The buyer obviously has to submit an offer in acceptance as part of those elements, and then the escrow closes whether during the listing terms or after. Offer acceptance after the period. Under the paragraph 3A2, and I'll go into the listing agreement and I'll share with you where that information and where that verbiage is at. So that way, when you are going for the listing and getting the listing agreement signed, you understand your role, your position, and ultimately how you can protect yourself. And here's what I see a lot. I see it blank. I see it blank. And when you leave it blank, folks, guess what? After the fact, it's too late. You're not able to go back and challenge the seller and say, hey, I am due a commission because that buyer that submitted an offer, or that buyer you're planning to go into escrow, was the same buyer that I originally shown the property, or they originally submitted the offer. This is where you need to protect yourself. Everything needs to be documented. And this is why it's very important that you make sure that you understand all the elements of this position in paragraph. Paragraph 3A2 protects the realtor from sellers who would unfairly take advantage of the licensed time, marking, and expertise without any obligation to pay for such services or benefits by a purposeful accepting offer after the listing period. Remember, there's a lot of sellers that are not, ethical. And if they can save from paying a commission, they're going to do so. So how do you protect yourself? Well, these are the three elements that we need. One, you have to put it on the listing agreement after it expires. If it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, or heck, you can even do 6 months if you like. So I'm going to give you those strategies and how, and the best approach and how to implement that provision to protect you from future compensation. What are the preconditions to earning a compensation after the expiration of a listing period? Before a license is entitled to a commission for a contract agreed to after the listing period, several events must occur, folks, okay? And that video kind of cleared it up for us. First, a time period must be entered. That is a must. And I'm going to show you the listing agreement and where that language is at, and where you're also going to put the time period as well. Identified by how long the protection period or a safety clause lasts. Since the clause extends the obligation under the listing, if the field is left blank, a court is likely to interpret the absence of the days against the interests of the broker, and has indicated that the license did not intend for the entire clause to apply. Very true. I saw it first Hi, can you hear me? Hello, hello,
Yes.
hello?
Yes.
I
Yeah,
apologize. I don't know what happened. We just had a slight little hiccup here. I was talking and all of a sudden the whole Zoom just canceled on me. So I sincerely apologize. Thank you so much for hanging in there. I'm hoping it doesn't happen again, but let's go back to our slide here. Let's see. All right. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So going back again, the first is the time period. You have to enter a day in there, okay? If you don't, the court, the judge will interpret that as if you didn't want to include any excursion extending the listing after it expires or cancels. So it is very clear that if you leave it blank, you're basically assuming the responsibility that you are not pursuing the potential commission after the commission is, after the listing is either canceled or expired. The post-listing obligation applies after the expiration or cancellation of the listing agreement unless otherwise agreed in the cancellation of listing form COL. Identifies different scenarios in which the seller would or will not owe a compensation. And I'm going to explain both the RLA, which is the listing agreement, and also the COL, which is the cancellation of listing. There's specific language on both of these forms that clearly states your position. And there has to be an alignment in order for you to go after a potential commission. I think before I got logged out, I was saying that one of our agents picked up a listing that it was previously listed by a different brokerage, and that broker and agent reached out to us saying, hey, we are entitled to a commission, if any of these buyers submit an offer. Well, remember, and we're going to talk about the three different elements in order for them to say, yeah, you know what, you are entitled to a commission if those three parameters fall in place. And I'll explain that later on. I just want to go through the elements of the presentation. Second, the listing broker must give the seller, and this is very important, must give the seller a list of a prospect list of buyers to whom that clause is intended to and applied. And the list must be provided before, and I have to emphasize this, it must be provided before the listing expires or cancels. So whatever happens, if you know that the listing that you have will be canceling or will be expiring soon, two things you must do. You either do the extension if it's about to expire, or if it's going to cancel and expire and the seller is not going to utilize our services, then you must provide this excursion list of all these potential prospecting buyers that have seen the property, physically seen the property, and ultimately submitted an offer. Even though their offer was never accepted or it was countered and the buyer never went forward with it, you still must provide these names to the seller in order for you to be paid a commission. Now, Simon, just because they submitted an offer, does that mean that we're entitled to a commission? No, it doesn't work that way. How it works is that if that buyer that did submit an offer comes back and submits another offer, and it was because our marketing, our showing of the property, either on an open house or they called you directly to see the property, then if they end up going into escrow, then we can go after a potential commission. Okay. The purpose of the list is to let the seller know that the entire into the contract, which a buyer will trigger the original broker right to compensation. Okay, remember, and I'm going to stress and emphasize this as we progress through the presentation, three things must happen. One, the listing agreement must include the days after expiration. Two, the buyer must submit an offer, have physically seen the property to fall under this category. Okay, and then thirdly, which we'll explain in a bit, will give us the opportunity to get a commission. The list should also be provided to a sequential listing broker to help prevent due claims to compensation. The notice of prospecting buyer transfer form, NPB, to be used to timely satisfy this requirement. So here it is, folks. This is the form that you must provide a notice of the potential buyers that have seen submitted offer, and this is going to be submitted to the seller and any other brokers that end up getting the listing. Let's say you have the listing 4 months, and then 4 months comes, you did not have the opportunity to sell the home, and it becomes an expired listing, but you get wind that the listing is going to another brokerage. I would email this provision prospect list of buyers to that potential listing company or brokerage in order for you to satisfy this provision to protect yourself from obtaining a commission. The obligation to pay a commission applies if the prospecting writes the post-listing offer thoroughly related to third party, such as a trust, a will-owned corporation, or LLC. So here's the third thing that must happen in order for the consideration to apply. Every prospecting buyer must have met one of the criteria in order to properly include on the list. The prospecting buyer must have physically entered and been shown the property. It does not matter if the property was shown by the listing broker or anyone else. The prospect must have submitted a signed written offer on the property. While dozens or even hundreds of prospects may have entered the property during the listing and enter the names on a sign-in sheet, listing broker will trim the list to those most likely prospects before providing the names of the prospecting buyers. Now, let's just say, for example, you are doing and hosting an open house. And if you are not having your roster as people walk into your open house, you have them sign in, because now you can use that as a reference to say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer went into the property on Saturday, because you'll know the date and you'll probably know the time, because on some of these open house registries, it'll have where you can put the name, the date, the time, their contact information, and their email. And then you may have series of questions as well. So when you have that, it gives you a little bit more of arsenal protection, that if any of those are provided to the seller before it expires or cancel, then they fall under that provision, and then you're protected if any of those buyers come back and buys the property. Failure to do so and include every person who entered the property might be interpreted again an overreaching by the court. So those are, again, how the court sees them, the judges sees it, is did they fall under all the categories? If they did not fall under the categories, then there's a breakage in the link of this potential provision to ultimately get a commission. All right, so let me go real quick into what the contract looks like. That way you get an understanding and how all this works. All right. All right, does everyone see my zip forms? Do you see my zip forms? Can I get a yes?
No.
You don't see it, okay. Thank you. Let me reshare.
Yes.
Now you see it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let me show you first and foremost the listing agreement, right? On the listing agreement, it's going to tell you, the information where I explain the provision. So when you go all the way down to the listing agreement, okay, right. Whoa, I went a little quick. Okay, you guys see this, the listing agreement? All right,
Yeah.
so you go through all the motions of filling out the information. So right here, where it says section 3(2), see that? If within, this is where you need to put something. If you leave this blank, ladies and gentlemen, what's going to happen is you're not going to be able to go after a potential commission if that buyer that showed or submitted an offer after the fact, then you're not going to be able to challenge this and go and get compensated for it. So my recommendation is 120 days, right there. If within 120 days after the end of the listing period or an extension or after any cancellation, this is the reason I explained that it's not just the expired listing, but it's also the cancellation. The seller and you just do not agree and are not on the same page. Seller says, I want to cancel. Listing agent says, I want to cancel. Then you mutually cancel. You still are protected under this provision. Because if that buyer that you showed the property or that buyer submitted an offer with another agent, we can go back to the seller and says, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, under the listing agreement, paragraph 3(2), there was a window of 4 months. And that 4 months happens to be 2 months after the expiration or the cancellation. This buyer is now in escrow with you. So now we have recourse in the position to go after our commission. And whatever the listing commission would have been. For example, you have a 5% commission and the listing typically would be up here, right? You put the total amount, 5%, and then down here on the bottom, you put, what you're going to compensate the cooperating broker down here. So that way, when the listing expires or cancels, now we can articulate our position and say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, per the listing agreement, there was 120 days after the cancellation. You happen to go into escrow with this buyer 2 months after, which falls under the parameters of 120 days. I'm entitled to half of the commission, which is half of 5%, 2.5. And for the most part, we can get our attorneys to draft a letter and send out to the seller for that protection. Okay. So I want to read the language so that way we're all crystal clear in our position. Okay. So the contract goes as follows. If within 120 days after the end of the listing period or extension, or B, after any cancellation of this agreement, unless otherwise agreed, seller enters into a contract to sell, convey, lease, or otherwise transfers the property to anyone, a prospecting buyer, or that person related entity, one, who physically entered and was shown the property during the listing period or any extensions by the broker or a cooperating broker, or two, for whom broker or any cooperating broker submitted to the seller a signed written offer to inquire, lease, exchange, or obtain an option on the property. Seller, however, shall have no obligation to broker under paragraph 3(a)(2) unless not later, and this is again the responsibility of the seller and ultimately the responsibility of you as the listing agent, is if it doesn't fall under these parameters, then you're not entitled to go after a commission unless not later than the end of the listing period or any extension or cancellation broker has given, and this is the key, folks, has given the seller a written notice of all of the names of such prospecting buyers. Ladies and gentlemen on this call, I want to urge you and really understand the elements of these contracts and the importance of knowing how to protect yourself, you spend time, effort, energy, and ultimately money in marketing the property, time preparing the property, time in hosting open house, time in going and just passing out just listed flyers, and then the seller decides to cancel on you and now goes in a different direction where they're being very deceptive or manipulative. Did I say that right? Manipulating the situation where you're not getting paid a commission. Then this is what helps you from these sellers that do you wrong. So I urge you that when you are filling out this agreement, that you're filling it out to the fullest and complete. Because if you do not put anything here and you leave it blank, then even providing that excursion list of all the potential buyers, it's not going to hold water. Why? Because the judge will see this. Well, Mr. Simon or Mr. Lewis or Hope, on the listing agreement that was provided, I see nothing on the within calendar days. So in my opinion, this listing expired and you are not entitled to a commission. Okay. Now, everyone will tell you their own interpretation on what to put here. But in my personal experience, and 24 years later, I remember my mentors putting 120 days. I don't know why, but 120 days seems to be the right sweet spot, which is 4 months after it expires. Now you can do it for longer, and you can also do it for a lot less. You can do 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. But I think the sweet spot here is 120 days, which is 4 months after it expires. That gives the seller, really time to think that are they in jeopardy of paying 2 commissions if they are trying to go in a different direction. And these are for sellers that are not, put it this way, they're trying to find the shortcut and not pay you a commission. Because I've seen it firsthand where the sellers are very smart and realize, look, I'm paying Simon a 5% commission. This other agent said he'll do it for 1%, but I need to cancel with the current one. So if they are doing something to that nature, and we provide a list of these buyers, then we are protected under the umbrella of the contract, and therefore we can go after the seller for compensation. And if you do this correctly, you can be at 5% or even 6% if you're going for a full commission, and you go back to 3% on the cooperating side of it. I'm just saying, okay, obviously all the elements have to be filled in, but this is what we're talking about, which is the expiration and how you are entitled to a commission. Any questions regarding this provision? All right. Now let me go into what it's the cancellation, the COL. All right. So the cancellation defines, if unfortunately the seller and the brokerage decide to part ways. Now the cancellation of listing is very important component to understanding how this compensation will be in effect. If you don't do the cancellation correctly, you may be jeopardizing an opportunity to obtain a commission. So the cancellation of listing is a 2-part form, part 1 and part 2, okay? So part 1 talks about broker and principal. Well, principal is the seller. They're saying broker and seller agree to cancel the listing and terminate their agency relationship, duties and responsibilities with and to each other, subject to the following terms and conditions specified below. So now what we're saying is, we as a Keller Williams company, you as the listing agent, and the seller is the principal, are coming to an agreement that we want to mutually agree to cancel. Okay. And these are the two elements of what we need to accomplish in order for us to protect ourselves from future compensation or future no compensation. So section 1, which checks off A or B, or you can check off both. Principal, meaning seller, agrees to pay broker the amount of compensation specified in the listing agreement. Under A, if prior to the end of the listing period specified in the listing or any extension, principal enters into a contract to sell, convey, lease, or otherwise transfer the property, which was already defined under that paragraph of the listing agreement. So I would check off section A. And then if within, okay, this is where we're going to put 120 days, right? Calendar days of listing, the listing period specified in the listing, principal enters into a contract to sell, convey, lease, or otherwise transfer the property. Remember, if the seller doesn't sell the property and cancels on you or expires, and within that 4-month period, they never put the property on the market, then no, you are not entitled to any commission. Okay. Just as no difference that, you know, the time period, they wait 4 months and 1 day, then they can put the property back on the market, and then they're not, the seller is not entitled to pay you a commission. I hope I make myself very clear in that. If they wait 4 months and 1 day to list the property or accept a buyer that was shown by your listing or submitted an offer while you had the listing, then guess what? The seller is not obligated to pay you a commission. That's simple. Okay. So you want to make sure that they stay within that time period after the cancellation or expiration in order for this to be a valid point. And now you can go after commission. You can go after commission. So I would check off both A and B. All right, section C, in the event of the transaction specified in A or B above, broker has no obligation to represent the principal in such a transaction. D, compensation is payable on close of escrow or if completion of the transaction is prevented by default of the seller or seller default. And then section 2, if you check this off, then principal agrees to pay the broker whatever that amount is, right? Which is half of it, which is 2.5% for the sake of argument of the compensation specified in this listing agreement. So these are the elements that you must provide the seller in order for you to go after a potential commission, folks. Very simple, but a lot of agents unfortunately do not follow the rules with this. And then when the deal goes sideways, now they're pissed off. And then they're reaching out to the broker saying, hey, I want to go after my commission. This seller went and submitted or accepted an offer with a buyer that I showed the property, or I had an open house. They came in and I had dialogue, or I submitted the offer in person. So this is how you protect yourself, folks. Section 2B, principal agrees to notify the other broker of the compensation obligation of this paragraph and to pay broker such compensation upon close of escrow. Seller has defaulted. If checked, principal agrees to pay the broker for out-of-pocket expenses. All right, so let's just say, for example, for the sake of today's class, you know, you don't provide that provision to list the buyers, but you spend $1,000 on marketing, flyers, and now the seller at no fault to you decides to cancel, and you spend all this marketing cost. You can check off section 3 of the listing agreement cancellation and ask that, you know, the seller pay as part of the agreement to cancel, because remember, it has to be mutually cancel between the brokerage and the seller. Just because the seller cancels doesn't mean that the brokerage needs to cancel the listing agreement. We can write it till the end of the expiration if they want to cancel before the time frame. For example, you list the property for 6 months. 4 months in, the seller changes their mind. They don't want to pursue in selling their property and now are asking you to cancel. Well, if you're okay with canceling, then we cancel and there's mutual agreement to it, then you're going to check off section 4, which says principal owes no compensation to the broker. But I caution you if you go in that direction, because even providing a list of buyers that have seen the property will not entitle you to any compensation, okay? But you can also ask for out-of-pocket expenses, costs incurred while servicing the property, which is marketing, any campaigns or anything that you incurred on the cost. And because the seller did not give you the time period to allow you to sell this home, you may be able to ask for out-of-pocket cost. And if the seller signs off on it, then they can pay you your $1,000 or whatever that amount is if the seller decides. So you can use this as leverage to hold on if the seller is really contemplating about canceling with you, okay? And then obviously the system does not allow you to check off number 4. This has to be manually or a wet check off from the buyer that allows the buyer no compensation, meaning that you and the seller have agreed. And sometimes the circumstances do happen where you mutually agree. Maybe there's a death, health issues, change in plans, and unfortunately the seller just does not want to sell, and you're in agreement with it, then yes, you as the listing agent have the authorization to mutually agree to the terms and cancel. Now, unfortunately, you don't have the control to cancel it on the listing or on the MLS. That's the broker, your broker. So if for whatever reason there is a mutual cancellation, no compensation, then all you have to do is execute this listing agreement, have the seller sign an agreement, and then check off that the principal agrees to pay no compensation. Then the broker will sign off on it, or the office manager, if you can see. So the principal sellers sign here, your company, Keller Williams, the corporate license of Keller Williams, and then your broker or manager can cancel this agreement, and they can manually override it to put it cancel on the MLS. Okay. Also, number 5 is other. If there's other agreements to it that you like to put on here, then this is the section that you can put additional language as well. Any questions regarding the listing cancellation? Okay, perfect. Now let me provide you with the next form, which is, what's the acronym of that? NPB. NPB. All right, so let's just say you do have the protection, right? And now you're providing this excursion list. So this is the form that you must provide the seller and any brokerage that ultimately takes the new listing from you. This is the notice of prospect buyer transfers, better known as the N as in Nancy, P as in Paul, B as in boy. Notice of prospecting buyers. This notice is being provided to you as a required by the what? The listing agreement, the lease listing agreement, or other. It can be the vacant land agreement, the manufactured home listing agreement. It can be a business opportunity listing agreement. It can be a commercial. So whatever that is, you are going to put that on here. obviously the address of the property and all the pertinent information. The listing period, the listing commenced on whatever the date that you got the listing, okay? And then on or was extended to the period of expiration date. And I love this form because it gets it very clear and concise of the compensation agreement. A, seller landlord has agreed to pay broker the compensation provided for in the listing agreement if within the specified time entered or after the listing period or extension or after any cancellation of the listing agreement unless otherwise agreed. Seller, landlord enter into this contract to sell, convey, lease, or otherwise transfer the property to anyone, including a prospecting buyer, transferee, or that person related entity who during the listing period or any extension, one, physically entered, was shown the property by the broker or a cooperating broker, and two, submitted to seller, landlord, a signed written offer to inquire in exchange or obtain an option on the property. The obligation above only applies if the broker has provided the seller, the landlord, a list of prospecting buyers, transfers, no later than after the end of the listing period or the extension of the cancellation. So basically, here it is, the list of potential buyers. And if these buyers were represented by a broker or an agent, and if any of these were an offer submitted. So you want to make sure that you are clear in your position, and you can print this or you can attach a blank sheet and type in or do an addendum. And here's like, let's say you had 25 buyers that came into your open house, and out of those 25 buyers, 5 of those submitted offers. So I would put all 25 because they may come back and say, hey, this property is now reduced in price, or the property is back on the market with another brokerage. If this buyer was physically in the presence during your listing, then you can provide this list to the seller and ultimately challenge and go after a commission. But remember what I said earlier, what are the 3 things that must happen, right? The listing agreement is the number 1 thing. You must put a time of expiration. 2, the buyer has to submit an offer or physically seen the property, okay? Those are the elements that must happen in order for you to go after a potential commission. And then lastly is the cancellation, right? The cancellation, you have to add those provisions as well. So that way there is no misunderstanding on the seller's position, the company's position, and more so you as the listing agent's position after it expires or cancels. And then here you would check off the list of prospective buyers list. So again, you can add an addendum, you can add a sheet, whatever the case may be. Make sure that you put the name, first name, last name, and what date that they saw the property. Because they may call them and say, hey, did you physically see this property? And are you submitting an offer or are you in escrow? Yes, I remember I saw the property during the time that Simon was the listing agent. He was hosting an open house. So that's why you want to make sure that you have all this information. Notifying the new broker. Seller landlord is advised to provide this notice to any seller landlord intent to relist with. Failure to do so may obligate the seller and or the landlord to pay 2 commissions. Now, no seller will want to pay 2 commissions. If they agree on a 5%, 2.5%, and now they agree to another commission because they list the property with another brokerage, and now let's say they're in escrow with that buyer that originally saw the home when you had the listing, and that buyer is now represented by another agent, guess what? That's 3 commissions. Your commission, the listing commission, and the buyer's agent that submitted the offer, that's 3 commission. That's a lot of money. And that can put the seller in a very, very tight scenario that I don't think the seller would like to be in. Date of notice, this notice of prospecting transfer is being provided to the seller on, and again, if the listing expires today, right? You must provide this before you actually get the final cancellation of it. You cannot wait till tomorrow, folks, and say, oh, by the way, here's the listing of all the buyers that have seen or submitted an offer. It's too late. The seller may have an argument and say, no, Simon, you, based on the contract and based on the language, says you must provide this before it expires or cancels. So therefore, I'm not obligated to pay you a commission. And you're right, we cannot challenge this because any judge will see right through it. And even a mediator will see right through it. Unfortunately, we don't have a case. We don't have legs to stand on this because we fail to meet the requirements. That's simple, folks. That's simple. Any questions, thoughts, or concerns? Was this information informative? Okay. I want to make sure that we understand that we're super excited. We're excited when we have that listing, right? Yes, congratulations. We just picked up a listing for $1,800,000 and you got the listing for 4 months. And then 4 months comes and unfortunately the seller did not accept 5 of those offers because the offers were a lot less than what the listing price was originally agreed on. And now the listing is about to expire. And you did not provide the necessary language on the listing agreement. You did not provide the list of potential buyers that have seen or physically seen the property or submitted offers. You're not in a position to collect a commission. I just want to make sure that I'm clear on that. And I'll let you know. If you are part of my team, I'll let you know. I'm going to ask you very specific questions. I'm going to ask for the listing agreement. I'm going to ask for the cancellation agreement. I'm going to ask for the list of buyers that you submitted. And if you don't fall under those categories and do not provide me all 3, you don't really have a case. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. These are commission disputes that I hear quite often. And the way to protect yourself from that happening is write it into the contract. Write it into the contract. Because if I come and I've seen phenomenal agents do everything correct, we have a case. I'm going to share a story that happened many years ago, same scenario, but this scenario was a little different. The contract used to say a little different. The contract before used to say that you must provide the seller with this exclusion list 3 days after it expires. So guess what? If the listing expired or canceled, the agent had 3 additional days to provide this exclusion list of potential buyers that have physically saw the property or submitted an offer. Well, that language has been eliminated. Now it must be prior to cancellation or expiration. So I urge you to please make sure that you understand how the elements of the contract works and how to protect yourself. First, the listing must include a time date. How many days? 60 days, 90 days, whatever that time, put it on the listing agreement. That's the number 1 thing. The number 2 is keep tight list of people who have seen the property or have submitted an offer. That's also very, very important because without that, how do you know if this buyer ever saw the property? You saw a lot of people come in, but you didn't get all the information. It's going to be very, very hard and very challenging for you to go after a potential commission. So 2, you must provide this list of all the buyers who have looked at the property or submitted offers. Okay. Then we can go after and help you with a potential commission dispute. All right. I hope I made myself very clear. I know it's a lot of information, a lot of content into it. And if you have any questions, by all means, please don't hesitate, reach out to me, and I'll be more than happy to provide you with a little bit more insight to it. But I think I was pretty clear. It's not rocket science. It's just very simple, practical concepts and principles that you need to understand. This is why these forms are here to protect you and your commission, because I know how hard all of us were to go after these sellers and buyers. Okay. Any final thoughts, questions before we close it out? And the good thing is we're finishing right on time, which is really good. Sometimes that doesn't happen. By the way, this Friday, here at the KW South Bay office, we're going to be going over the new purchase agreement. I would love to see you in person. Lunch will be provided. It's a 3-hour course, folks. It's from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock this Friday. I urge you, if you are not taking the class with us or with your association or with your market center, get on it. The new purchase agreement will be in effect come December of this year. So there's a lot of new language, a lot of new clauses in there, and a lot of different contingency periods that you must be in the loop to protect yourself and protect your clients. Okay. With that being said, I appreciate all of you on the call. Thank you so much. And again, if you have any additional questions, do not hesitate to reach out to me.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.
Simon.
Thank you. Yolanda, it's so good to see you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Miguel, it's so good to see you too. Everyone. Awesome to see you. Thanks,
Have a good
Sophia.
Bye-bye. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.